The morning fog sits low over Bitterroot. Old Walton Reeves stands at the edge of his cornfield, coffee going cold in his hand. He is not looking at the sky. He is looking at the ground. Thousands of ants move in a single dark ribbon across the dirt, not scattering, not foraging, marching. Each one carries an egg, a larva, a fragment of the colony's future, up toward the high ground of a small ridge at the edge of his property. Walton has farmed this land for 70 years. He has never seen this before. He sets his coffee on the fence post. He does not say a word to himself. He simply watches. A crew from Meridian Infrastructure Group is parked nearby, surveying land for the county's new levee project. Their trucks gleam, their instruments blink. The lead engineer, a sharp young man named Grant Holloway, steps out to stretch his legs. Walton walks over. He does not raise his voice. He never does. 70 years farming this valley, he says. Never seen ants move a colony like that. There's a flood coming. A big one. You boys ought to start preparing now. Holloway smiles the way young men smile at old men. Polite. Certain. Wrong. We trust satellite modeling, sir, he says. Not insects. Walton nods once. He picks his coffee back up. He walks home. If you have ever watched an elder in your family notice something the rest of the world ignored, a quiet warning nobody wanted to hear, you already know where this story is going. Stay with us to the end, because what this old man does next will make you question everything you think you know about who actually protects a town when the water rises. If stories like this speak to something in you, hit subscribe now. Somewhere out there, someone you love is trying to warn you about something. This channel exists, so you never stop listening. A week passes. Nobody in Bitterroot thinks much more about the ants or the old farmer or the conversation at the fence line. Then Walton does something nobody expects. He drains his entire savings account. Every last dollar he set aside since his wife passed. Every dollar he swore he'd never touch. He drives 2 hours to a government surplus auction and buys 15 shipping containers, rusted but structurally sound, sitting in a gravel lot like abandoned tombs. The auctioneer barely blinks. Nobody else bids. 15 steel boxes, chosen for their integrity rather than just their price. Walton pays in cash. He signs the paperwork with a steady hand. He arranges for flatbed trucks to haul all 15 containers back to Bitterroot, up onto the high ground of Anthill Ridge, the very same rise where the ants had carried their eggs. Walton knew his hands alone weren't enough for the clock ticking in his head. He made 3 phone calls that evening. By dusk, 2 of Coraline's grandsons and 3 retired mechanics, men Walton had taught to weld 40 years ago, quietly pulled their trucks onto the ridge. They didn't ask for pay, and they didn't ask for explanations. They simply asked where he wanted the doors cut. Under the hum of portable work lights, the ridge became a hive of midnight industry. Walton wasn't just a crazy old man anymore. He was a commander mobilizing a forgotten army of the skilled. By the time the first truck rolls through town, everyone has heard. The old man has lost his mind. The word spreads faster than the flatbed trucks can drive. At the diner, at the feed store, on porches up and down Main Street, the story gets told and retold until it hardly resembles the truth anymore. Some say Walton spent his whole pension. Some say his grandchildren are driving in to have him declared unfit. Some just shake their heads and go back to their coffee. Walton says nothing to defend himself. He never has been a man who explains. His neighbor, a widow named Coraline who has lived across the road for 30 years, watches the containers arrive from her porch. She does not laugh. She does not ask questions. That evening, she crosses the road with a thermos of hot tea and sets it on Walton's workbench without a word. He nods his thanks. She nods back. Neither of them says a single sentence about the 15 steel boxes now lined up on the ridge like the ribs of some sleeping giant. That is the kind of trust that does not need explaining. Some people spend a lifetime earning it. Most people never do. The next morning, Walton begins to work. He starts with the first container, cutting a doorway into the steel with a torch he has owned since before most of the town was born. Sparks fall onto the frozen ground like brief, dying stars. He works alone, the way he has worked alone since his wife died, the way farmers have always worked when the job needs doing and there is no one left to ask for help. Container by container, the ridge begins to change. He works in groups of 3. 3 containers become his mechanical heart, a workshop and parts depot stocked with decades of collected tools. 3 more are turned into a fortress of supplies, filled with grain, canned goods, and water drums. 3 are dedicated to power and fuel, housing a heavy-duty generator and sealed diesel tanks. 3 are outfitted as emergency shelters with basic cots and medical supplies. And in the final 3, wrapped in canvas tarps like sleeping animals, sit the machines Walton has spent 30 years restoring in quiet solitude. An old Caterpillar bulldozer, its yellow paint long faded, its engine rebuilt piece by piece over a decade of Sunday afternoons. A steam tractor older than anyone in Bitterroot, its iron wheels resting on the same ground his own father once walked. Nobody in town knows these machines exist. These machines weren't a hobby, they were a long-standing debt. Walton remembered the flood of 1974 when he watched his own father's truck sink into the mud because the modern electronics of the day couldn't handle the silt. He had spent 30 years restoring the Caterpillar and the steam tractor because he knew a hard truth. When the world truly breaks, digital brains fail, but iron gears and steam pressure do not. They were mechanical survivors, built for a world that didn't have a 911 to call. Nobody has ever asked what the old man does out in his barn on the far edge of his property, night after night, year after year. They are about to find out why he kept them. 2 weeks pass. The containers on Ant Hill Ridge sit finished now. Quiet steel boxes on a quiet hill, giving no hint of what waits inside them. From the road, they simply look like what everyone already believes them to be. An old man's expensive mistake. The town does not let the matter rest. At the Bitterroot Diner, the story becomes a running joke. A waitress refills coffee cups and asks, half laughing, whether anyone has checked on the container fort lately. A farmer 2 tables over says Walton could have bought a new tractor, fixed his roof, maybe even taken a trip somewhere warm for the winter. Anything but 15 rusted boxes on a hill nobody uses. The joke reaches Grant Holloway. Meridian Infrastructure Group has set up a small office in town while the levee project moves forward, and Holloway, ever confident in the tools of his trade, agrees to an interview with the local radio station. He speaks about satellite modeling, about hydrological data, about the modern systems that now predict flooding with precision no farmer's instinct could ever match. Near the end of the interview, the host mentions the old man and his ants, half as a joke, half out of genuine local curiosity. Holloway laughs into the microphone. With respect to our elders, he says, folklore isn't flood control. We have real data. We don't need to watch insects to know what a river is going to do. The clip plays on local radio for 2 straight days. People repeat it at the feed store. People repeat it in church parking lots. Somewhere in that repetition, an old man's 15 containers stop being merely a curiosity and start being a punchline, the whole town's shorthand for foolishness. Walton hears the clip once on Coraline's kitchen radio while he drinks his coffee at her table. He does not react. He sets his cup down carefully, the way he sets everything down, as though the world has never once needed to be told what he thinks of it. Man's got fancy tools, he says quietly. Tools don't watch the ground. Coraline says nothing. She has learned over 30 years that some silences are worth more than any argument. Outside, the sky over Bitterroot has begun, almost imperceptibly, to change color. The rain begins as nothing more than a whisper against the tin roofs of Bitterroot. A gray Tuesday, nothing unusual, the kind of soft autumn rain that farmers welcome after a dry season. Nobody thinks twice about it. By nightfall, the whisper has become a drumbeat. By the second day, the drumbeat has become something closer to a roar. The rain does not stop. It does not pause to let the ground breathe. It falls in sheets so thick that the mountains beyond the valley disappear entirely, swallowed into gray. The Elderbrook River, which has wound gently through Bitterroot for as long as anyone can remember, begins to rise, first inch by inch, then foot by foot, then in a way no one in town has words for. Holloway's satellites had tracked the clouds, but they couldn't see the earth groaning. An ancient, unmapped limestone shelf miles upstream had collapsed under the saturation, creating a temporary natural dam that finally burst with the force of 1,000 freight trains. The sensors in the river were choked by mud instantly, blinded when they were needed most. But the ants had felt the infrasonic vibrations of the shifting rock weeks before. They weren't reading the sky, they were listening to the bones of the valley. On the third night, the river stops behaving like a river at all. It breaks its banks just past midnight, and the water does not so much flood the town as arrive in it, sudden and total, filling streets that have never once seen more than a puddle. Meridian's equipment yard, parked low near the old grain depot, disappears beneath brown water within the hour. Bulldozers, survey trucks, generators, all of it sinking silently into a river that satellite models never once predicted would reach that high. Across town, the Reeves salvage yard, the low garage where half the county has brought their tractors and trucks for repair over the decades, goes under just as fast. Tools that took a lifetime to collect vanish beneath the current. Fuel drums float loose and knock against fence posts in the dark. The town's power grid fails just after 2 in the morning. Streetlights blink out one by one, block by block, until Bitterroot sits in a darkness broken only by the distant flash of emergency vehicles that cannot reach half the roads they need to reach. And on Ant Hill Ridge, 15 steel containers sit exactly where they have sat for weeks, untouched by the flood below, high and dry above a valley that has become, almost overnight, a lake. A single generator hums quietly inside container number 1. A single light glows in the window. Grant Holloway, standing on a rooftop 2 streets away with his ruined survey equipment floating somewhere beneath him, looks up toward that distant light on the ridge and, for the first time in his life, says nothing at all. By dawn, Bitterroot is a town underwater. Rooftops break the surface where streets used to be. A church steeple stands like the mast of a sunken ship. Families huddle on the second floors of homes that were never built to hold back a river, calling out to neighbors they cannot reach, listening to a silence broken only by rain and the groan of water pressing against wood that was never meant to hold. Emergency services stretched thin across the whole flooded county cannot reach the town's edge for hours. Radios crackle with requests no one can answer fast enough. Then, through the gray morning light, a sound rises from Ant Hill Ridge. An engine, old, deep, unmistakable. Walton Reeves sits behind the controls of his restored Caterpillar bulldozer, easing it down the ridge road toward the flooded edge of town, its ancient tracks finding purchase where modern trucks would simply sink. Behind him, the steam tractor follows, hauling a flatbed loaded with fuel drums, blankets, and crates of canned food from the containers he built with his own 2 hands. He does not wait for permission. He does not wait for instructions. He has spent his whole life fixing what breaks, and the town has just broken. Near the old depot, a modern emergency RIB boat from the county sat dead in the water, its high-tech outboard motor choked and stalled by floating debris and submerged wire. Walton didn't slow down. He steered the ancient caterpillar through 4 feet of churning brown water, the mechanical engine roaring a defiant rhythmic thrum that ignored the flood entirely. He threw a heavy steel chain to the stranded rescue crew and the family they were trying to reach. The old man didn't say a word as he hauled the entire modern rescue unit toward the high ground of the ridge, a relic of the past dragging the failures of the present to safety. By noon, the containers on the ridge have become something the town has never had before, a place that still works. The generator room powers a string of lights strong enough to guide rescue boats through the dark water after sunset. The medical container becomes a triage point, Walton's basic bandages and antiseptic treating cuts and scrapes until real paramedics can finally reach the ridge road. The food stores, mocked for weeks as an old man's paranoia, become the only hot meals half the town has eaten in 2 days. Grant Holloway arrives on the ridge just after 4 in the afternoon, soaked to the bone, his expensive equipment gone, his confident modeling drowned somewhere beneath the very river it failed to predict. He stands at the edge of the container camp and watches Walton hand a thermos of coffee to an elderly couple who lost everything they owned 6 hours earlier. He does not offer an apology. Not yet. He simply stands there, silent, watching an old man do with steel boxes and stubbornness what an entire engineering firm's instruments could not do with all their data. Some lessons do not arrive with words. Some arrive simply by watching who is still standing when the water finally goes still. 3 days later, the water begins its slow retreat, leaving behind a town coated in mud and silence. Streets reappear. Porches emerge, stripped bare, their contents scattered somewhere downstream. Bitterroot will spend months rebuilding what the Elderbrook took in a single night, but it will do so with every one of its people still breathing. Not one life was lost in Bitterroot. In a county where 3 other towns buried neighbors that week, this fact alone becomes something people speak of in careful, grateful whispers, the kind of gratitude too large for ordinary words. On the 5th morning after the flood, Grant Holloway climbs the ridge road on foot, his boots caked with the same mud that now covers the whole valley. He finds Walton exactly where he always seems to be, at the workbench in container number 1, oiling the joints of the old caterpillar as though it might be needed again tomorrow. Holloway stands in the doorway for a long moment before he speaks. "What made you so sure?" he asks. "About the flood. I've spent 10 years studying river systems and I never saw it coming. You saw it in a line of ants." Walton sets down his oilcloth. He does not answer right away. He walks to the doorway, past the young engineer, and looks out over the ridge toward the small rise where the ants had carried their colony 3 weeks earlier. Ground that never once went underwater, ground the ants somehow already knew to trust. "Nature always gives a warning," he says finally. "Question is whether folks still know how to look." Walton pointed to a single ant crawling along the steel rim of the container. "That thing doesn't have a satellite, and it doesn't have a degree," he said softly, "but it keeps its belly to the dirt. The problem with your tools, son, is that they're all looking down from too high up. The higher you fly, the harder it is to hear the ground breathe." He does not say it with pride. He does not say it to prove a point. He says it the way a man states a fact he has known his whole life and simply never had reason to mention. Holloway nods slowly. He does not offer excuses. He does not defend the models or the instruments or the confidence that once filled a radio interview. He simply extends his hand, and Walton, after a moment, shakes it. In the weeks that follow, Walton does not take a single dollar for what he did. When the county offers him recognition, a plaque, a mention in the local paper, he declines all of it, with the same quiet certainty he has carried his whole life. He asks only that the town rebuild its grain depot on higher ground, the way his father once told him it should have been built 70 years ago. The 15 containers remain on Ant Hill Ridge to this day. No longer a punchline, no longer a mystery, but something closer to a monument. A reminder that the sharpest tools are not always the ones with blinking lights and satellite feeds. Sometimes the sharpest tool is a pair of eyes that never stopped watching the ground. If this story moved something in you, if it made you think of someone in your own life who noticed what everyone else missed, who was mocked for trusting what they knew instead of what they were told, that feeling is worth holding on to. It is easy to lose that kind of wisdom in a world that trusts screens over instinct. Subscribe now, so the next time someone tries to warn you, you remember there is still a place that honors the ones who listen.